We've just been, will have learned that the Nordic countries are better than anywhere else, and we have the joy of bringing you, one of their most esteemed daughters this afternoon. So so Ria is obviously taking her future into her own hands, travelling to Britain during the Brexit period when anything could happen. Theresa May could come back from a walking holiday in Wales to close all the borders, but we're hopefully not. So just to briefly introduce Ria, I'm sure everybody's very well aware of her work. I think I first met with her, I can't remember whether I'd read her book before or after I first met with her, but we were at a conference to find in Ria somebody who was as bemused by what was going on in a sort of very heavily psychological conference about different instruments that people were creating, and we were like, well, what is this about, really? So, and from that, I managed to convince her to work with me on a number of projects, including some of the work that we've done on politics and social justice, and all of that really was very inspired by her first book, which, if you haven't read, is absolutely really central, I think, to the way career guidance is developing, career guidance in communities, which really, really blew my mind when I first read it, and was kind of put into words lots of the things that I've been thinking and lots of the critique that I'd had. And just to, what Ria's going to talk about today is going to draw on her inaugurals. She's so esteemed that she's been elevated to professor in 2 places simultaneously, and has given her inaugural now in 2 countries, and we'll be drawing on it today. And as I spend quite a lot of time in the Nordic countries, a lot of my Facebook feed is in various Nordic languages, and I could see the enormous excitement in the build-up to Ria's inaugurals and how people were talking about it, and then the huge kind of welling of support that came out after it. And I think there was a sense from people that this was really, that although not to take anything away from Ria's huge personal achievement, but it was also an achievement for career guidance within Denmark and in Norway particularly, for it to have a professor, full professor, and so on. And so she's going to be drawing on some of that, and then also on some work that she's been doing in Norway, where there's lots of interesting things happening. And I think the strength of what she's going to talk about is shown by the fact that I haven't actually heard it. I've had it explained to me by a mutual friend, and I was so amazed by the brilliance of it. So even at one level of translation away from her ideas, it was really great to hear about it. So you're in for a real treat this afternoon, so put your hands together and invite Ria Thomsen, Professor Ria Thomsen.
Thank you very much. It's like I'm actually not that fond of standing behind things, but I think it's necessary so that you can hear what I'm saying. Perhaps I should turn this a little bit. Is the sound okay now? Okay. Thank you, Tristram, for that introduction, which is, I think, quite impossible to live up to, no matter what I will say, but I have things that I would like to share with you today, and hopefully also things that we can discuss during the days that we will spend together. First of all, thank you for the invitation to speak, and also to the organizers for arranging this inspiring event. As a NICEC International Fellow, I'm excited to be part of vivid exchanges and discussions over the next couple of days. Is the sound okay? Because in my ear it's sort of going up and down. It's okay, good. A month ago, I gave my inaugural professorial lecture at the Danish School of Education at Aarhus University. And the title of the lecture was, "What is Career? research in career guidance between adaptation and emancipation. This is a picture. At one point in that lecture, I looked at the audience, and the audience was compiled of colleagues, family, friends. In Denmark, inaugurals are public events, and some 300 people had come. Many of them were career guidance professionals, practitioners, makers, teachers, or people who were intrigued by the title. But when I looked up at that point in the lecture, I noticed that some people had tears in their eyes, emotional. And I, for my part, quickly returned to my manuscript because I didn't know exactly what was going on. But afterwards, I started reflecting on what I was talking about at that point in the lecture. And I guess for many of us gathered here today, we are used to speaking about careers, about work, about education, about learning, about life, and all the struggles, possibilities, barriers, successes that are connected with career. But many people are not used to speak about career. In fact, many do not consider that they have one. So, what was I speaking about at that point in the lecture? Let me see. Yeah. I was speaking about an interview that I gave to a Danish national media called Zetland. An interview which the exceptional journalist Sarah Alford gave the title, "Dear Youth, lower your shoulders. Your choice of study do not determine your future." And when that was communicated to the larger public, parents started tagging their young people on social media, alerting their attention to the article, and friends did the same for each other. In the commentaries, it was clear that the insights that the interview communicated about careers not being linear, about unexpected events and chance influencing career trajectories, was bringing relief to the experience of pressure and the anxiety of making the wrong choice. So what became clear to me during the inaugural was that my role as a professor of career guidance was not only to conduct high-quality research in collaboration with practitioners and users and create new insights into what we can describe as our field. Our shared task is also to make central conceptualizations and discussions, because we inside our field do not necessarily agree upon what is career, but to make conceptualizations of career available to citizens as ways that they can understand themselves and explore career as a non-linear and complex and within their capacity to affect and change. If we return to the pressure in terms of education, of making the right choice, fear of failure, and fear of the future, experiences can be seen in relation to what Hodgkinson and colleagues coined as a folk theory of career already in 2006. In the lecture, I also pointed to the fact that much education politics in Denmark is based on what they describe as the folk theory of career. The idea is that they are linear, the idea that one choice is the right choice for you, and also the idea of the labor market being a meritocracy. And then what I said in the lecture, and where I think people became emotional, was that this is a folk theory of career, but it's not just a folk theory, they are also false premises. So it's not true that careers develop in this way always. At the same time, what I also was talking about was that it's very easy to see how that folk theory of career development is a neat match between what others have termed neoliberal ruling mechanisms. And I would like you to note, this is Chomsky in the picture, and if you look at the last 2 bullet points, what he points to is the impact of neoliberal ruling strategies, and I'm not going to go into detail with this, because there's something else that I would like to show you also, is the experience of individualization of structurally induced problems and self-governing responsibility for ensuring oneself against insecurity and precarity. And that this, of course, creates experiences, feelings of pressure and anxiety for doing it right, for getting it right, for being a person who is responsible of success. In the books, or the book that Tristram, I don't know if you mentioned it, but one of the things that Tristram and I have been doing together with Ronald Sultana has been to invite people in our field, both researchers and practitioners, to write about career guidance and its relatedness or interconnectedness with neoliberalism and social justice. And people have been doing that under a number of themes and from different theoretical approaches and also different fields of research. But one of the things that we write in the introduction is that in neoliberalism, problems are posed and solutions are suggested. But a person like Carol Bacci, she suggests us to not accept the problem as a true problem at the first instance. She says, no, we need to ask the question of what is this problem represented to be? And we did a small analysis of, for instance, if you say that states today, as Cerny points to, are competition states, and I'll come back to that later, then the role of career guidance will be to support people in maximizing their potential and develop flexibility towards the need for labor. If the problem is presented to be we live in an era of globalization, then career guidance will support the mobility of labor nationally and internationally. If the problem is presented to be that the current state of welfare is unsustainable, we have that discussion a lot in Denmark because of the welfare system that we have, then what follows from that is that reforms of the education system is needed, and then the role for career guidance can be to increase individual responsibility and guide individuals to make wise investments in the development of their individual human capital. I would like to share with you a few examples from Denmark on what this looks like in practice. A competition state is an understanding of states as entities that compete with each other, but also the understanding that inside states there are companies that compete with each other. Sometimes even states and companies compete with each other, and that compete to get, for instance, the best jobs. So competition is communicated to all people, and especially to young people in relation to their lives, in relation to education, and in relation to their entry into the labor market. The winners will receive their prizes in the future according to the choices that they make today. The competition state, as part of neoliberal ruling mechanisms, are in the rhetoric, but it's also in the structures. And it's about understanding the education system as something where you should, in this argumentation, you should look to minimize the costs. For instance, through getting people faster through the system, and then the argument is made because we cannot afford to spend the money. And I mean, that is clearly a matter of priority and not something that is just a truth. So in Denmark, we have initiatives in higher education policy that sort of emphasize this, especially in relation to young people. It emphasizes the pace, the expectations of the pace through which they have to pass through the education systems. So we have a thing called the Quick Start Bonus, which allows an applicant to multiply their grade average with 1.08 if they apply for a higher education program no later than 2 years after completing their upper secondary exams. Another example is the study progression reform, which intended to reduce the amount of time it takes Danish students to complete their university education. And the main instrument is obligatory enrollment in subjects and exams equivalent to 30 ECTS points each semester. And students would lose their study grants if they missed a step or were delayed for more than 6 months. So the overall goal was to reduce Danish students' completion time by 4.3 months by 2020. Such structurally imposed constraints make education systems less flexible, and the path that young people should stay on more narrow, with less room for the unfolding of individual career and life trajectories in diverse ways. And then we can think about the role of career guidance in this type of system, and also perhaps the need for researchers to engage in discussions on that role. Because I guess many of us like to understand career with this picture, which I've taken from This Is Your Life, a Career and Education Planning Guide from the government of Alberta, which is clearly a picture of the development in education and career as not a linear trajectory, sorry for that. Many things happen under the way. So why is it that context, I think the first speaker today also was talking about that context and complexity are difficult to acknowledge in perhaps in career guidance practice, but definitely in the development of policies for career guidance. We do have a number of careers theory and models that recognize and build on different understandings of both context and complexity, and I have mentioned a few of them here. Many are part of the book by Nancy and Mary, now I forgot the third author, which I thought on the table on career theories. And I know that Mary will be giving a presentation on the system theory framework for career development. But I would like to move on from this, setting this scene, to actually really consider complexity as part of our work, and how we as a field work towards acknowledging complexity rather than pretending to reduce it. Theories and methods development within the field, such as planned planned happenstance, community interaction, career shift theory, system theory. Many of these include oxymorons, planned happenstance for instance, which is something I will return to in the lecture. When I do research and also policy development, I of course work from a standpoint. I don't believe that there is a place where any of us can be neutral, more or less truly or freely objective. But what we can do is to be transparent about our understandings and the standpoint from which we work. Some have very clear sort of standpoints, and others probably have them if they try to explain them to someone else and write them down. So I'll just give you into critical psychology, which is basically a theory on social psychology and psychology from the standpoint of the subject, and the subject here being the individual. So it's an approach where you try to research social practices through the perspectives of the participants. So understanding what goes on in practice from their perspective. It's also a research that is collaborative. Julia was talking about this this morning. So in my research, I was trying to figure out whether I should say often or always, but I believe that I can say always, involve practitioners and users as co-researchers in the research process, and there are different ways of doing that. There are a lot of categories through which the analysis take place. One of them is the conduct of everyday life, which I will share with you in a moment. But it's also an approach that takes everyday experience and also conflictuality as the central concern of critical research. And that the theoretical framework serves as a tool to analytically engage in collective dialogue between research and practice, although I'm not sure that I would use the word between, because in this view, all of us are part of the same practice, but we do have different roles. And we, with our different roles, but also conditions in terms of where we are employed, what we work, we can make different contributions to the development of the practice. It's a situated and contextual understanding of the concerns and challenges of human subjectivity and the conduct of everyday life. And conduct of everyday life is a category that can really help us acknowledge complexity, because conduct of everyday life is a personal arrangement in relation to the social arrangements of everyday life. That might seem perhaps a little bit abstract, but I'll try to give an example, because what it means is that all of us at the same time take part in different contexts, although we're not physically there. So you're sitting here now in this room physically, and I guess you're also listening to my presentation, but my guess is also that sometimes your thoughts wander off to another context with things that occupy you from that context. It can be something you have discussed at work, or something that you know is waiting for you, that you need to solve, decisions around the family, and all these contexts are present at the same time, which also means that every time a person makes a decision in relation to their career, the reasons for making that decision can come from all these different contexts. And these contexts are not necessarily aligned. Often they will also be conflictual. So a choice that you make based on reasons that you draw from one context will be in conflict, or maybe even opposing to what you want to achieve in another context. We have the term work-life balance, which I think illustrates some of this. But the conduct of everyday life is what persons do when they make life go on anyway. So all of us solve these contradictions and conflicts on a daily basis. Some of the ways that we solve them, we have routinized, so we don't constantly think about it. But something can happen in one of the different contexts that elevates the need to sort it out in a new way. So, conduct of everyday life involves persons coordinating their various obligations and relations and activities within their various co-participants in social contexts across the day. To do so, persons set up more or less loose agendas and develop more or less elaborate ordinary sequences of activities to be carried out regularly. With this in mind, and also the idea of complexity, I would like to return to the idea of problem representations. So if we now leave the idea of linearity and try to embrace complexity. Oh, sorry, I forgot that I had that slide because it's not in here. I think I'll do this first and then perhaps return to the other slide. So what could alternative problem representations be for career guidance? And the alternative problem representations that is suggested here is based on chapters that are in the first book on career guidance, neoliberalism and social justice. Irving argues that career education as a critical social practice that it can be career education as a critical social practice with the aim of enhancing awareness and understanding of the diverse ways in which life careers might be meaningfully constructed and enacted. Buchanan and Hooley, career guidance with the role of conscientization and helping individuals to explore the interrelationship between their career development, technological change, and political transformation. And Alexandra Ribeiro and Foncati suggest to resituate career guidance as a practice that do not per se promote geographic mobility of theories, models, and labor, but instead invites both practitioners and people to include a socio-spatial perspective to the notion of career and to think critically from both a local and a global perspective. Let me just go back to this slide. In the book Career Guidance in Community, which is a qualitative study of career guidance in 2 different places, I'm not going to go into detail with that. One of the things that I end up discussing is a reinterpretation of career guidance, which goes like this. Well, it starts with the thing in bold, but what that research showed, and perhaps also what the speaker this morning reminded us, was that career guidance practitioners, but also researchers and politicians, we cannot assume that career guidance will be perceived as a relevant and useful practice by everyone at every time. We would like to, that would be nice, but that's just not possible. But perhaps there are ways to move forward that can help us develop practices that will be more in relation to the everyday experience of the people with whom we would like to engage. And that is that if career guidance can provide a context for actions in which participants can join forces with the career guidance practitioners, and now is the key word, to analyze and create opportunities to find their way in a situation, calling for particular thoughts and actions in relation to their future educational or vocational participation in society. So the key word here is analyze and create. And what I took away from the first presentation this morning was that the people or colleagues that he had talked to didn't have that impression of what career guidance is about. My guess is that many of you do have that impression and interpretation that career guidance is a practice for shared analysis of structures, of interest, of possibilities, and even a shared creation of new possibilities in terms of brokering and advocating for different groups of people in our society. When we were reading the chapters that were submitted for the book, what was very striking was that all the chapters, actually including the introduction that Tristram Hooley, Ronald Sultan and I was writing, was that most of them took their point of departure in policy definitions of career guidance, such as the definitions suggested by the OECD, the World Bank, the EU, the ELGPN. I think that this is the table of content for the second book, which will be published, I think. It is published, sorry. I think that it's fair to say that those policy definitions in different variations have served the professionalization agenda in career guidance well over the years, and perhaps mostly in the beginning of the development of a profession. And also in many countries, they have also served the development of practices, organizations, and even development of systems of practices, and as such has been the driver for change, perhaps mainly at political and professional level. But what we also felt, based on the chapters of the book and discussions in those chapters, was that they inspired us to come up or suggest an alternative definition. And that another definition perhaps could give us inspiration to have new dialogues about what role career guidance should or can play as a publicly funded practice in welfare states. And what is in bold here, I noticed, is actually a part that sometimes is left out of the definition, perhaps because it's where the most radical suggestions are, but I have chosen to include it here and put it up there, and this is something that I would like to discuss with you over the next couple of days. So it's just a suggestion, and it's based on all the chapters that we received and also what they conclude as a possible role for career guidance when you ask them to explore career guidance in relation to both neoliberalism and social justice. But now I would like to take you on a short trip to Norway and into a current policy development process where this definition was discussed among researchers, policy developers, and practitioners as part of the process. The policy development process is conducted by the Norwegian Ministry of Education and specifically by Skills Norway, which is the Directorate for Lifelong Learning. The vision of Skills Norway is lifelong learning for an inclusive economy and society. In 2017, Skills Norway was commissioned to develop a framework for quality in career guidance practices across sectors, including ethical guidelines, competence standards for the education of career practitioners, and a framework for career management skills. And it is the latter I would like to share with you. This policy development process also works from a definition of career guidance, and you can see the Norwegian word for career guidance on top. It's my translation, and it goes like this. The goal of career guidance is to make people better able to handle transitions and to make meaningful choices related to education, learning, and work. Career guidance provides the opportunity for exploring the individual situations, desires, and opportunities, and support for action and choice. Career guidance can take place individually and in groups, both physically and digitally, and takes place within the framework of various organizations and sectors. Career guidance shall be offered by competent actors, have relevant professional basis, and be carried out with a high degree of ethical awareness. The suggestion that was developed for a framework for career competence has 3 elements. The first element is a theoretical and professional background and basis for career learning and a definition of career competence. Then there's a model, which is called career learning in context. And then there are 5 areas for exploration and learning, which are called career competence areas. If you know anyone in Norway, this is the names of the people that took part, and they represent practitioners in career guidance across all the different sectors where career guidance takes place in Norway. When we talk about career competences and career management skills, there are a lot of statements that describe or help us understand what that is or suggest what that is. Some of them here are in Norwegian, some of them are in English, and some of them you will probably recognize from where you do career guidance or work with career management skills. Other frameworks looks like this. It's a list and a taxonomy that explain to us what a person should be able to do. So the competence is defined by being a statement, and then of course the next step would be to find out whether a person is able or possess this competence or not. So it is something that is defined from outside the person, that they sort of measure themselves or relate to together with the career practitioner or teachers in schools. One of the discussions in the group was that many, including myself, but also the practitioners, felt that this way didn't make much sense in practice and weren't really supporting the development of innovative practices that were able to relate to the people for whom this was meant to make a difference. So we were trying to think of how we can do something else. Another problem was that we wanted to really acknowledge the complexity, and we were building on the understanding of the conduct of everyday life, among other concepts that I just shared with you. And what this does is to organize everything in a very neat way, and there isn't really things beyond this. But it also communicates something about appropriate responses. So what is appropriate responses? That is, for instance, it's difficult for me to see. Can you see it up there? Not really. Develop abilities to maintain a positive self-concept. That's communicated here to be an appropriate respond. Yes. Yeah, okay, that was my time cue. Okay. So, and from this list, it is then explained how career guidance activities can support the development of specific career competencies or career management skills. And then there's also given a reason why citizens should develop those skills, and the reasons are often, but not always, but often explained in relation to rapid changes in the labor market, automation, and that the future of the welfare system is related to people acquiring the necessary skills to keep up with the changes, such as flexibility, curiosity, and adaptability, and being efficient in the education system. Now, there is nothing wrong with being flexible and open to change, but it might be so that it's not always the answer that is best for the person in front of you. And a person that reminds us of that is Danish philosopher and psychologist Svend Brinkmann, who wrote a book called Stand Firm, Resisting the Self-Improvement Craze. This book is an example of books crossing over from science and conceptual debates within a field and into popular mainstream culture, because of it being in sync with considerations that most people experience in their daily lives in relation to education, work, and life as such. And it is my hope that more scholars, practitioners would engage in such writings around career, trying to communicate the complexity. So just briefly, you can read that by yourself. I think these are the theories that also underpin the work that we did in the group in Norway. And the model for career learning in context aspires to acknowledge context, complexity, and paradoxes in career development. And this is what it looks like. The argument or hypothesis behind the development of the model is that the development of career competences is a result of a shared exploration process that is open, because it do not have preferences in terms of the correct or the desired skills to develop, because they are not defined beforehand. It also tries not to name the specific skills, and it's open in terms of where people would seek their answer or inspiration to the answers. We, as sort of a, no, I don't know how to put this. We just discussed that people can look to Google for information, or they can look to God for a calling. The model does not say anything about that. So what this model tried to do is to visualize possible dilemmas and tensions that can be present and meaningful when a person is managing life learning and work in change and transitions. So we have me in context, which is the only one that is not a pair of words, but the other ones are horizons of opportunities and limitations, choice and chance, change and stability, adaptation and resistance. And of course, when translating this, there are other opportunities. So limitations could also be restraints. Chance could be coincidences, luck, and there is no official translation yet. But what the pairs of words visualize are possible dilemmas and tensions that can be present and significant when a person conducts life learning and work in change and transition. So the idea is that this model should inspire practice development, that really embraces complexity together with the users of career guidance practices. It's inspired by oxymorons, which Tony Watts was also talking about 10 years ago in his inaugural. The idea of bringing two words together with opposing meanings to stimulate people's reflections about things in life that cannot be solved. They can perhaps be managed or dealt with or taken forward, but problems will not necessarily go away. They will just be there in new constellations. And that having career competences and managing a career is being able to revisit your problem constellation throughout life. So I would like to encourage you to think about which tensions, dilemmas, and paradoxes the people you work with experience in their daily lives. And move on to the last slide from me. And say that, of course, career guidance cannot combat fears and anxieties imposed by neoliberal ruling mechanisms by itself. But I do think that career guidance has important contribution to make in terms of supporting people in identifying and understanding the communications directed at them, telling them what is expected of them to do in relation to education and work. Also often followed by, if they don't take the right action, the whole country's welfare is at stake. At least that is a communication we're able to identify in Denmark. So, Ronald Sultana Twistram and I call this emancipatory career guidance. And it's a title that other scholars like Bassett, Bluestein, Preletinsky, Hislop Marginson, Irving, and Plant, among others, have spoken before us. And we have tried to sum up what this means in 5 signposts. Signposts that are described in the closing chapter of the second book. So, I think that what I'm taking part in now in Norway is actually a way of developing a new take on career competence and career management skills. You can say that it builds on what has been done previously, but also suggests an alternative to the ways it has been understood before. And I would like to close by saying that I think that there's still, because this is also something that Tony spoke about 10 years ago in his inaugural, was the necessity for all of us involved in the careers field to be in constant dialogue about the way that we understand career, and to really understand that it's different from the way that most people understand it. And because it's different, most people perhaps don't relate to career guidance as something that can be helpful for them, which I think, and I think that you also think, that it can. This was what I had to say. Sorry?
So, I was just going to say, well, obviously, it's hugely thought-provoking, and a lot of us would like to sit and talk about it more, but we'll be coming back together again at the end of the afternoon, where we'll have opportunities to think a bit more. I think we're probably going to need to push people towards the workshops now, so you know where the workshops are, and we're then going to move into coffee and poster sessions. So if you brought a poster, then go and stand